Alright, so now we're going to talk about the Galactic Government and kind of break it down a bit and go through it in extreme levels of detail. So, the Galactic Government is formed up of 6 different offices. And these offices are the Office of the Galactic Parliament, or OGP, the Office of the Galactic Magistrate, or OGM, Office of Intergalactic Intelligence, OII, the Office of the Intergalactic Trade Commission, OITC, and the Office of the Legislative Executors, OLE, and Office of Intergalactic Relations, or that's acronymized as OIR. So these 6 governmental agencies handle the day-to-day issues, workings on, and all that kind of garbage for the intergalactic community. So let's go ahead and start with the Parliament. So the Office of the I already can't talk. It's not a good sign. Can't already talk. Already can't talk, rather. Really can't talk. So the Office of the Galactic Parliament, or OGP, is comprised up of 3 different individual branches. These are the Parliament itself, the Office of the Joint Interior, and the Office of Parliamentary Information. So the Parliament, the OJI, and the OPI. So the Parliament itself is made up of 3,000 members, each race getting an equal number of representatives to that of their population, but also based on their contribution to galactic society. So the more a particular race contributes, the more seats they get in the next session of Parliament. And conversely, the worse a race is, the less they get. So, little factoid there is that the Dryson have the most seats, while the Silicon have the fewest. Because the Silicon, antagonizes the Galactic Government to no end whenever possible. And so that means that they... Camera's a little off center there, or rather monitor's a little bit still off. Tiny bit. No, that's too much now. Alright, that should be good. And so they don't have as many. It's essentially a way to impose consequences to races not behaving, not following the rules, member races. So it's kind of a built-in thing that they can use to rein in the out-of-control races and try and impose some sort of order over the empire that has an actual tangible effect, that affects the amount of influence they have within the Galactic Government. Let's see. Following the directives laid out by the Galactic Magistrate, the Parliament works on legislation towards that end. In order for legislation to pass, 8 in 10 representatives, in other words 80% of the Parliament, must agree on the passage of the legislation, or it's forced to go through a process of review by a smaller panel called the Legislative Review Board, which is comprised of an equal number of members from each race, that number is 6. So 6 members of each race form this board, and they go over the LRB, and they go over the legislation to see why, and talk with other parliamentary members to figure out why it didn't pass. And then they create a report and give that to all parties involved with the making of the legislation, and then they can, those individuals can remake the legislation or tweak it so that it will pass. Or the LRB can also make a recommendation of just, canning that legislation because it will never pass. So, the Office of the Joint Interior is an elite group of members who have been recognized for great contributions to the Parliament. They are promoted out by unanimous vote into a position within the OJI, and are called upon to litigate disputes within the Parliament, as well as personally consult the magistrate on such matters as the need arises. So, if one particular party in Parliament has a dispute with another one, the OJA comes in and they investigate and essentially they render the verdict. They're the judge and juries in these things, and they can also pull in the magistrate if they need to. Though that doesn't really happen too often. Currently, there are only 7 members within this group, and they are called upon very rarely. As an example of when they were most recently called, though, it was just after the Seven-Year War had started. The Earth Alliance accused the Sluicon of attacking them, unprovoked attack on the Earth Alliance, and the OJI came in and litigated that dispute and determined that both sides were at fault, so there was no, nothing happened either way really. It's just one instance, and I'll see if I can't find some more instances to make note of in the lore. So next we have the Office of Parliamentary Information, or OPI. It's essentially the public relations wing of the OGP. They're responsible for ensuring most parliamentary gatherings, unless specified classified, are publicly broadcast on any news stations that want to carry such proceedings, as well as providing written transcripts in any and all languages on the ODN. And the ODN stands for the the Optical Data Network, and it's essentially the galactic version of the internet. Optical. It almost sounds too much like fiber optics. Well, it's going to be O something data network, because that comes out as Odin, if you pronounce the acronymized version of it. So I'll leave the O there and I'll figure out what to put in there. Originally it was Omega, that's why I said Omega, but I've changed it to optical, but now I'm going to change it again because that doesn't really make too much sense either. So whatever it is, it's something O something data network, Odin. Next we have the Office of the Galactic Magistrate, which is comprised up of 3 branches on its own. The Office of the Magistrate, OM, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, OJCS, and the Office of the Special Administrative Branch, or OSAB. So the Office of the Magistrate includes not only the Magistrate, but also teams of low-level politicians and intelligence officers who prepare daily briefings for the Magistrate. The Magistrate is responsible for setting primary directives for the Parliament and their legislating, as well as directing the activities of the OII, which is the Office of Intergalactic Intelligence. Besides these duties, the Magistrate is largely a public figurehead with no real power outside of these. However, the Magistrate can authorize actions that have a limited effect within the realm of the government. So really, the way I wanted to model the Magistrate is pretty much like the United States presidency, where the president has really no power whatsoever outside of some executive action powers, but they're pretty much just, a powerless figurehead that has more to do with the foreign, has more power with foreign events, foreign issues than they do domestically. That's pretty much how the Magistrate is structured, except for one important difference. And it's probably one that in this day and age, a lot of Americans probably wish the president could do this. And that is that the Magistrate essentially lays out an agenda at the beginning of their term, and that gets delivered to the Parliament. And the Parliament has to not necessarily follow it to the letter, but they have to enact legislation that fits within the vein of what's practical of getting, what's practical to get towards that kind of a solution. And if they don't do that, the Magistrate has a specific power they can use. They have to be backed up by 100% of the courts. 100% of the courts, and also at least 60% of a actual empire-wide vote that goes on. But they can, the Magistrate can enact this, and if they get all that support that they need to get, then they can essentially eject the entire parliament, and a new special election is held to re-elect the entire parliament. So all 3,000 members get, pardon my French, shit-canned, and they essentially have an election to replace all of them. And the ones that do get kicked out cannot run for re-election again for that special election or for any other election for the parliament after that. That's only happened once in the history of the Galactic Empire, though, which I will be talking about on the lore on the website a bit. So, but outside of that one specific power, the magistrate really can't do much of anything. Pretty much like the President of the United States. So, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's the next group, or next branch we're going to talk about. And it's a conglomerate of professionals that have been appointed by the magistrate to delegate tasks to relating to the areas of operation. Currently, there are only 5 chairs on the cabinet. The Secretary of Province, the Director of Intelligence, Secretary of Defense, the Financial Magistrate, and the Director of the Interior. The Secretary of Province controls both the OSAB and the OIR, so Office of Special Administrative Branch and the Office of Intergalactic Relations. The Director of Intelligence is in charge of the OII, except for the military divisions, which were folded into the OII after disbanding of the parliamentary militia several millennia ago. The Secretary of Defense is in command of the OII arm of the OII arm of the military arm of the OII, as well as joint control of the OSAB. And the financial magistrate heads the Intergalactic Trade Commission. The Director of the Interior deals with the logistics for all the branches of the government, including things such as employee resources, background checks, that kind of stuff. More the kind of HRE kind of stuff. Joint Chiefs both advise and take advice from the magistrate where it's appropriate. So let's talk about the OSAB. It's really a more secretive branch of the OGM. Kind of, you can say, I guess you can kind of call it something similar to the Secret Service, except, you know, just more like the CIA. Like, if you combine the Secret Service in America with the CIA, and then mix that in with the more kind of blackish ops kind of agencies that we have, that's kind of what you get when you're talking about the OSAB. Not too much is really known about it publicly, other than it does exist, and that it deals with highly classified information that can't be handled by the OII. This branch is in control of the special forces teams that can be deployed by the Parliament, and they report directly to the Magistrate and Secretary of Defense, as well as the Secretary of Province. That takes us to our next group, next branch, which is our next office, the Office of Intergalactic Intelligence, which is broken down into a lot more organizations. So these organizations are the Central Intelligence Authority, CIA, see what I did there, the Galactic Investigative Bureau, GIB, the Central Agency of Military Affairs, and the Galactic Law Enforcement Federation, GLEF, and the Special Projects and Research Division, SPRD, or SPIDER, or SPIRD, I guess. The CIA is responsible for gathering information on any number of topics at any time, and using resources and assets within the various empires to obtain that information. Things that the CIA looks into are stuff like terrorist threats, intelligence gathering on member races, surveillance of suspected terrorists, as well as involvement in investigations on certain acts of espionage and sabotage. Excuse me. The GIB is an investigative branch of the OII. Anytime a major crime occurs, the GIB is called in to collect evidence and testimonies, as well as to launch an official investigation into all parties involved in the crime and around the crime scene. Now, how the OIB does this is actually kind of interesting because these things just fell off. You have, like, on computer chairs, you have those things that fit over the screw holes, those things. That one of those just fell off over. Um, but the GIB has this really insane way of how they investigate crimes, and actually it results in a 96% case closure rate. In other words, the cases are solved and relevant parties go to jail or whatever. And what they do is they investigate the scene of the crime, anyone that's around there when the crime happened, and then any suspected people that were related to the crime. Then they go several levels deep into every person that they investigated through that process. So, family members, relatives, friends, their friends' families and relatives, and their friends' relatives' families. It's this massive kind of data collection kind of thing that they do, and it's pretty effective at catching criminals. In fact, it's also good at catching crime syndicates, because you get a whole bunch of information you can use to kind of piece together, and sometimes they get lucky and find, mobs and things like that. So it's a very extensive operation, but also has a very high success rate of solving cases and bringing the relevant parties to trial. At times, the GIB will team up with other branches of the OII, or even other branches of the government in the course of their duties. The COMA is a military branch of the OII, headed by the Secretary of Defense. The COMA, that's C-A-M-A, not C-O-M-M-A, or however you spell, comma as in the punctuation. COMA handles the protection of government assets from attack or disasters. Normally they operate in conjunction with the Parliament, the CIA, and the GIB in the course of their duties, but they also are given some autonomy. Due to this, there are several divisions of the COMA that handle specific and specialized tasks, but almost nothing is known about these organizations, except that they exist from money trails and whatnot. So, the GLEF. The GLEF is a fully autonomous agency that receives funding from the same grants as the COMA. They are responsible for enforcement of intergalactic law, capturing and housing of criminals, and protecting the courts and politicians. A special division of the GLEF is the Tolereth, who established security outposts and systems to enforce the GLEF's policies, as well as scan ships entering systems for contraband or known and wanted criminals. Pretty much nothing is known about the SPRD at this time, and any and all records related to the group are still top secret. Actually, it's above top secret. So literally you have to have, essentially be the president or Secretary of Defense to know anything about those files. That brings us to the OITC, the Office of the Intergalactic Trade Commission, which is responsible for setting up and enforcing any and all things related to trade and commerce. The OITC is comprised of several different branches: the Intergalactic Trade Commission, ITC, the Galactic Exchanges Commission, GEXCO, the Galactic Weapons Regulation Administration, GWRA, and the Intergalactic Commodities Authority, ICA. The ITC has a major influence in all the other branches of the OITC and can enforce its own policies if necessary within these branches. The Trade Commission is responsible for being a watchdog organization on various businesses that operate within its purview, which is basically every business except for military contractors. And what they do is essentially they watch these organizations to make sure they're not insider trading or bribing officials or some way subverting the political process. And in fact, there are just insane penalties for doing so. If any corporation, company, whatever, is found giving money to a politician for any reason, that company is essentially taken over by the government and liquidated. And the board of directors for that company, including all the high-level executives, are jailed for up to 10 years and have 75% of their assets seized as well. The parliament member that was being bribed, paid off, gets sentenced to 25 to 30 years in jail and gets fined by having all of their assets taken from them. It's a very serious thing. The intergalactic government takes bribery, lobbying, and all that kind of stuff that, here in America it's just insane, all the amount of money in politics. Takes all that stuff seriously, and it's essentially a zero tolerance policy whatsoever. It's actually pretty effective too. And at first, obviously, there were a lot of problems because people are always going to jail because after it got passed. Well, I'll talk about that more in a thing because really that should be talked about because that'd be an interesting topic to cover in the lore. Let's see. The ITC also creates regulations on weapons sales in conjuncture with the GWRA. They also regulate the placement of stations, authorize new licenses for businesses, and set the list of contraband that the Telerath uses. Gexco manages and operates the markets except for commodities, and there's a good reason for that. They police inside traders, deal with setting policy for trading, regulating the use of AI sellers and buyers to prevent slides, and perform watchdog duties so that there's no insider trading with companies, or no companies are forming like monopolies or things like that. Again, zero tolerance policy for all that kind of stuff too. If anyone's doing like a cooperative oligarchy, I think is what it's called. So it's like a monopoly between, it's like a monopoly between a bunch of companies to essentially indicate that they will not compete against each other. So if one company raises their prices, all companies will raise their prices. And that's really prevalent as well in our society. Especially within the cable company, telephone company, and ISP company areas, because essentially they become monopolies or duopolies, where you have one telephone company, one cable company. They can pretty much just do whatever the hell they want because there's no choice whatsoever, and they can squash out all the smaller companies, small businesses that come up that do that kind of stuff. So, but in this system for the Galactic Government, pretty much the same as with the bribing. Board directors are put in jail, have their assets seized. The companies are seized by the government and sold off piecemeal. And it's pretty much what happens. As far as the regulating the markets go, they don't really regulate it on a very sophisticated level, I guess you could say. It's more just like watching the people using AI sellers, AI traders, and making sure they don't, exacerbate slides or spark off major sell-offs or whatnot. And also watching for terrorist attacks on the financial system, as far as potentially causing a massive sell-off through hacking and whatnot. The GWRA is a special branch of the OITC, but it's actually a branch of the GLEF that's been externalized and put under the control of the OITC just because of the functions of it. But still answers to the GLEF in terms of what it does and whatnot. They cooperate with the ITC to come up with a list of weapons that are banned for use, sale, or trade by member races and by companies doing business within the Galactic Government's purview, and that does apply to military contractors as well. They're also imbued with special powers to arrest and charge anyone in possession of illegal weapons, no matter who they are or what diplomatic immunity they might have. This power also extends to the Telerath. And then we come to the ICA, which is an interesting branch of the OITC, just because of how it was, how it came about. So, back before this branch was made, the Gexco also handled the commodities market. But it didn't really enforce any of the laws. The commodities market is more of like the kind of like a almost old west kind of situation where you can pretty much get away with a lot of stuff. There wasn't much any enforcement of any rules or anything. And this led to a specific instance that caused the galactic economy to essentially slide into depression within 2 days. Well, not 2 days, but relatively quickly in comparison to how long I've been around for. Been in a upward climb for. So what happened is that some pirates formed a pirate band, if you will, and attacked a system that was responsible for 86% of the production of platinum for the entire Galactic Empire. And so they went in there, took it over, killed all the workers, destroyed all the equipment after mining out most of that, and destroyed the deposits that were left. And what they started doing is selling it back into the markets very slowly. Since the supply was cut off and there was no more production happening, the value of platinum shot up by about 200,000% overnight. And what was happening is that people are pulling tons of money out of the stock market and using it to buy the platinum that's being sold. And then after the pirates would sell a bit, they would, hold off a bit. The value of it would skyrocket again. They'd sell a bit more. And doing this, they made obscene amounts of money. But also anybody else that was quick enough could pull enough money from their stocks or wherever other investments they had to buy the dips and sell the highs. It also made a lot of money. And what happened is that over about the course of a week and a half, 2 weeks, the stock market value fell by about 70% because all that money had been taken out to, essentially ride this roller coaster of a thing that was going on with what the pirates were doing. After the pirates made enough money, they took all that platinum and then sold it all at once into the market, caused the value of that to crash, and essentially wiped out almost all of the galactic economy's worth, because all that money had been put into platinum. Now platinum was worthless, and so everyone was, essentially eating their shoes, because that's how much money they had. And it caused this massive crash that led to a depression that lasted for 200 years. And after that happened, the Galactic Government formed the ICA to strictly control the commodities market so that this would not happen again. And so what happens is that if they see any hint of any kind of that situation happening again or any kind of speculation whatsoever, they can halt trading indefinitely, and then they also have the powers to essentially locate through any means necessary the person or persons that instigated the action that they saw that thought that was abusive, and essentially they can arrest them, take all their money, all their assets, and then those people get thrown in jail for life. It's essentially a life sentence. So it's a very extreme thing. And but it was in response to a very extreme situation. Like I said, just imagine if throughout the entire history of the United States that we were in a depression. That's kind of what that time period was like. So you can kind of understand why they gave the powers they did to the ICA. So next we're going to talk about the court system, and also the Office of the Legislative Executors. The OLE is in charge of the courts, and really the name Office of Legislative Executors is a misnomer because it's only one individual that actually is part of this thing, and that's the Grand Legislative Magistrate. They submit appointees to Parliament for an up or down vote, confirmation vote. And if over 50% of the vote is yay for an appointment, that appointee is confirmed to a position within a court. So, courts are all essentially nominated positions. There's no elections. And the magistrate gets to determine, who goes to what court. And the Parliament votes up or down on that confirmation. So now, that's pretty much all there is to the OLE. So we're going to talk about the courts now for the rest of the time. Because it's a very, not complex, but it is complicated. And you can also become a, prosecutor in a court or a judge or what have you, if you wanted to as well. Like I said, you can do pretty much any friggin' thing you want to in this game, or will be able to. So the courts are broken down into several stages, through which different types of case law pass through. You have the civil courts, which deal with non-criminal activity. That's stuff like civil suits, class action lawsuits, that kind of stuff. Then you have the criminal courts, which deal with the criminal cases. And they handle those cases individually and respectively. The next level up of courts are the appellate courts, which handle both types of cases, and they handle cases that are either appealed from the lower, that are being appealed in the lower courts, or that the lower courts are sending to them because they don't think they have the jurisdiction to rule on those. After the appellate courts comes the circuit courts, which deal with cases appealed or sent to them by the appellate courts. And then you have the sectorial courts, which deal with the cases appealed or sent by the sector courts, or circuit courts. And in most cases, the cases die in this particular area. If they get to the sectorial courts, that's where the cases end at. However, there is another stage. That's the Intergalactic Superlative Court, the ISC. The ISC deals with cases that present questions to settled parliamentary law. Excuse me. So it's essentially like the United States Supreme Court. So now we're going to talk about the jurisdiction level and how the actual branches of the court system are kind of, essentially set up and how they're laid out. So each level of the court system has a specific jurisdiction. Each race has their own courts, and no case against another empire can be lodged without probable cause as determined by these lower courts. Inter-empire cases are handled exclusively by sectorial courts. However, the cases have to first go through the civil or criminal courts, depending on what the case is. The appellate court and the circuit and sectorial courts, or circuit courts, get to the sectorial court. And if at any stage in the process before it gets to the sectorial court, a court says your case has no standing, go screw off or something, then that case is summarily thrown out, and the defendants, or the plaintiffs, have to reformulate their case and bring it back to the courts again. And that's just because it's made to be very hard to abuse the system for inter-species, inter-empire bickering. So as for how the courts are set out, the civil and criminal courts operate with a per-system jurisdiction. So whatever system the court happens to be in, that's the system that court has jurisdiction over, and no other court can deal with a case from that court's jurisdiction if they're not in it. So in other words, here in our solar system, we would have our own courts. Those courts could only handle cases from within our system, and no other court outside of our system can handle cases from our system. That's the lower courts, the criminal or civil. Appellate and up can. The appellate courts have jurisdiction over no more than 10 of the nearest systems, while there's only so that means that there are essentially the way that's broken down is you have two, or rather you have no, there's five appellate courts. And they're broken down essentially so that you have essentially two courts on each. Visually, two courts on each side. These courts each handle cases from the 5 systems, and then the fifth court is used kind of as a stopgap, if you will. If a particular court cannot handle a case for whatever reason, that fifth appellate court handles it. Or if there's some sort of case that requires collaboration between all the different courts then the Fifth Appellate Court handles that case, and the other courts work with it to do whatever they need to do. The Circuit Court there's only one Circuit Court, and its jurisdiction is a sector-based jurisdiction, so that's anywhere from 20 to 30 systems. And the Sectorial Court, which again is a bit of a misnomer. Oh, crap! Excuse me. Has jurisdiction over up to 50 sectors. So a 50 sector jurisdiction, in other words, up to, I guess I should say. Can have less, but not more. Then you finally have the ISC, which has jurisdiction over all the other courts. And it also can't be overruled by less than a unanimous vote by the Parliament over 70% of the lower courts, as well as the magistrate. So, if the ISC makes a ruling, and a lot of people don't agree with it, they can essentially petition the magistrate to open up a query with the court system, and all the lower courts, in other words, all these the sectorial, circuit, criminal, civil, and appellate courts are pulled. And if 70% of them agree that the ruling was made in error, and there's a unanimous vote in Parliament for it, that same outcome, and the magistrate approves of it, then that ruling from the ISC can be overturned. Otherwise, it can't be overturned by anybody. So again, it's kind of a complicated system, but not overly complicated. And finally, that leaves us with the Office of Intergalactic Relations, not the, which is responsible for providing embassies to member races within other empires, as well as defending those embassies, and providing embassies within the galactic capital as well. They are able to requisition forces from the Telerath and Kama to complete this directive if required, but they also have their own internal guard force that's trained on par with the special forces deployed by the OSAB. So essentially like the State Department, I guess you could say, of the United States government. Kind of like that. So that hopefully this kind of gives you an example of the level of detail that I'm going to be using for the game. I'm going to try and make everything have this level of detail, from the story in the game to the information in the game itself to the lore to the universe, backstories, what have you. The key to making a very compelling game is to have a very compelling universe or world that the game takes place in. That's why Mass Effect was such a success, is because the way that BioWare made the universe made it seem real. There was enough realistically possible scenarios in it, and enough actual historical history built into it, that it seemed plausible that that set of situations could happen at that point in time. So I'm trying to aim for something a little similar to that. Maybe not the exact same kind of setup, but as that is, but something that's believable and you're able to kind of get lost in, if you will. So that's going to be it for these series of videos. The next ones that we do will be on the game mechanics, and that's going to be a very long series, because the game mechanics are over half of the entire length of this file that I'm using for the script/overview outline that I'm using for these. So it's going to be a very long discussion, and you're going to get a really good idea of what's going to be in the game, or at least what's planned to be in the game, and what you can maybe expect from some of the mechanics. But until then, this is George Williams, and I will see you then.